World Development Report 2014, Risk and Opportunity. Managing Risk for Development. Global Risks, with Ian Golden, Director of the Oxford Martin School, Oxford University.
The World Development Report of 2014 on Risk and Opportunity encapsulates many of the issues that face development. This has been the most extraordinary time of development, the greatest time in many respects in the history of humanity. And that's because we've been able to connect more, our societies have been able to integrate and become part of a world economy. There's been enormous progress in technologies, a leapfrogging in many cases. And of course, with the advances, and particularly advances in information, there's been increasing well-being, life expectancy has increased, health's improved, infant mortality has gone down, and people have urbanized and had economic development at rates which are unprecedented in human history. So it's a wonderful time to be alive. It's certainly the best time to be born poor, because one's chances of escaping poverty are greater than ever in history. So the opportunities are enormous, but we need to appreciate that the other side of this opportunity is risk. And unless we become more effective at managing risks, unless we understand that with opportunity comes risk, and with individual rights comes responsibility, not only to oneself, but to the community, to the collective and the world, this could unravel. The risks could become so challenging that many of the advances that we've achieved get set back. And as people perceive greater and greater risk, and as they see this coming from over there, from outside their societies, from foreign places, there's a real danger that there'll be a political backlash. A backlash against integration and connectivity. That walls that have been crumbling around the world since the fall of the Berlin Wall 25 years ago will be erected again. That societies will become more xenophobic, trying to keep foreigners out, more nationalist, thinking about their narrow self-interests, and more protectionist, trying to prevent trade and financial and other flows coming into their societies. The problem is that as we get more connected, as we become more integrated, and as our technologies advance, we also become, in some respects, more vulnerable. More and more things will cascade over our frontiers. More and more shocks will come from technologies that we don't understand. And the unintended consequences of our success, in many cases, will lead to new systemic risks. Systemic risks are risks that go beyond traditional risk boundaries. They're risks that can cascade from one sector to another, for example, from finance into housing markets, into industrial activity, and from one country to another, for example, the subprime crisis in the south of the US to a global financial crisis that's affecting people everywhere in the world. And that's a systemic risk. And as we become more integrated, the nature of risk changes. So that these risks that we create ourselves out of our success, and the financial crisis encapsulates many of the dimensions of these new systemic risks of the 21st century. It came about as a result of very rapid technological change, computer-driven derivatives, fiber optics which allowed trading around the world, and the World Wide Web. It came about because the distribution became global as well, because financial markets became integrated globally, because risk was being distributed globally. So an internationalization, a globalization. It came about because of short-termism, because the politicians who might have understood what was happening at times didn't have the political will to do anything about it. They did not want to take away the punch bowl, the alcohol, while the party was going. It was not in their political interest, and the bonuses and short-term incentives in the banks compounded this. And it came about not because of too little data, but because of too much. The inability to drink from the fire hydrant, from suffering, drowning under a data deluge. So the real problem as we get more and more integrated and we have more and more information is not the lack of information, but how to discern the valuable information, how to distill what's valuable and understand it, and how to drink from the fire hydrant of big data. All of these factors will be present in many of the new risks. Among the big risks we need to worry about are pandemics, which can now spread much more widely and quickly because of integration on airline traffic. And in the Oxford Martin School where I work, in Oxford University, we've modelled the spread of swine flu and shown that this exactly mirrors and reflects airline traffic, and that anything will be everywhere within 48 hours now. This is the underbelly, the dark side of greater connectivity, in this case in transport. Systemic risks will be manifest again in finance because the system has failed to understand the impact and the reasons for the past financial crisis. So we have very fragmented regulatory responses and over-complex regulatory responses as well. In other words, you cannot fight complexity with increasing complexity. You need rules which are simple and rely often on intuition, trust and ethics, and are based in a way that everyday people can understand. So risk, and increasing systemic risk, is endemic. It's the other side of the coin of integration and progress. And in many areas this is very obvious as well in terms of risks that we're beginning to perceive. Climate change is a classic example. It's the result of more and more people climbing the energy curve, putting more and more dirty pollutants out into the atmosphere, the greenhouse gases. And this is going to require a massive collective effort, but it's only going to increase risk greatly, particularly for poor people in poor countries, people living on marginal lands. Poor people always are the greatest victims of risk. Rich people can get more air conditioning. They can do things which help avoid for them the impact, for example, of climate change. It's the poor people we need to worry about most, particularly if we're interested in development. Another classic example of a commons failure is on the food agenda. As everyone eats more and more fish, the price of fish goes up and the fish get exhausted. And we've seen this with the bluefin tuna recently, going for many, many hundreds of thousands of dollars. We see it with rhinoceros horn as well. What's rational for individuals, which is to consume more and spend their money on things, is not rational for the collective. So this global commons problem in the atmosphere, in the oceans, on antibiotic resistance, it's rational for people to take more antibiotics. If they all do it, the antibiotics become resistant. What's rational for the individual is not necessarily rational for the community or the world as a whole. We need to accept rules and regulations which manage our long-term interests for the better for all of us. And how to manage becomes the crucial issue. What is the role of regulators? What is the role of the community? What is the role of the private sector, of insurance companies and others in the private sector who help manage risk? And what are the appropriate safeguards? I'm convinced that we cannot fight complexity with growing complexity in rules and regulations and global governance. 200 plus countries cannot agree to many things. We need creative coalitions. We need changes in accounting practices so we don't mark to market and push short-termism. We need to value resilience in our communities, in our governments, and in the private sector. So resilience needs to be on the positive side of our ledgers, an asset, not a liability. If we invest in having a bit of spare capacity in a factory or in a staff complement or in a hospital supply of oxygen bottles and food, that is an asset, and it should not be seen as working capital tied up. Societies and firms that simply want to sweat their assets, believe that lean is mean, are failing to see that resilience and sustainability are more important in the longer term. So we need to create incentives that focus on the longer term and inclusiveness. Social cohesion is also vital, because as we tackle these big challenges, we do have to ensure that our societies don't turn inwards, that they don't begin to feel threatened by pandemics, by financial crises, by cyber attacks, and by the many other things that will come and become more pressing on our societies. So becoming more joined up and cooperating becomes absolutely vital if we're going to deal with the big challenges of risk and resilience. I am convinced that societies which are open and connected are those that will enjoy the best prospects for the future. policies need to be developed to ensure that we are not too open. And in capital accounts, for example, it was shown that the societies like China, like India, like South Africa, like Chile, which had some ability to manage their inflows and outflows, did much better than those that were totally open. So we need policies which ensure an integration which is on our own terms, but we also need to ensure we don't turn our backs on connectivity. We need more, not less cooperation if we are to deal with the big challenges of finance, of climate change, of pandemics, and of other many systemic risks. It's a challenge that requires new thinking, and that's why the World Development Report of 2014 is so opportune. If we are to enjoy the opportunities of development which are possible, we need to understand the risks, and that's what the report is about. Thank you.